I'm speaking with Ian Karnell, CEO of VastAdvisor, an AI-powered organic growth system for wealth management professionals. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Ian, can you explain the value proposition for VastAdvisor as well as how it works?
Yeah, sure. So $120 trillion is beginning to shift hands to digital first generations. It's the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in the history of mankind. And we have an industry that is continuing to, or that has been overly reliant from a growth perspective on referrals that don't scale, lead brokers like the smart assets of the world that don't create leverage, or generic AI increasingly that creates risk. VastAdvisor was built to solve for all of those. We use AI to help RIAs and wealth enterprises build scalable, predictable, repeatable growth systems by helping them identify who their ideal client profiles are and then activating those profiles through media platforms like Google, Meta, and LinkedIn. And then the last thing we do is we capture all of the signal intelligence related to every signal that we see on the platform, from the firm profile to their ideal client profiles to the campaign orchestration layer to the campaign results. And we use that to feed back into the system and build models that are specific to that firm or wealth enterprise that improve the results over time. So it's a growth intelligence tool that becomes a meaningful asset for the firm moving forward.
And what is your view on how advisors and firms can become more targeted about organic growth, as well as your view on how organic growth may factor into M&A decisions?
Yeah, I think most firms treat marketing today like a lottery ticket instead of a system. So they run a campaign, it works or it doesn't work, and they can't tell you why. So, like next quarter, they're guessing, right? And that's kind of a dartboard versus a system. So the fix isn't spending more, it's not more budget, it's measurement discipline at the end of the day. So if you're actually tracking your cost per qualified lead, not just cost per contact, which is what most CAC numbers hide, you start to see what niches, kind of what messages, what channels compound over time. And we've seen qualified lead costs run in the $70 to $80 range for firms that are doing this right versus $2,500 or $7,500 in a blended CAC for firms that are buying leads from third-party lead brokers. So once you have the data, organic growth stops being a kind of a guessing game and starts being an engine that you can forecast and tune and scale over time. Why this matters, I think, from an M&A perspective, and we saw some of these insights in my last wealth tech venture that we sold to Envestnet, a company by the name of Truelytics. Truelytics was a practice management tool. We were measuring 150 different key performance indicators in a practice to calculate the intrinsic value of the practice. The use cases there were for succession planning or for M&A. And we had, I don't know, 40,000 on platform when we sold that to Envestnet. But one of the data points that we really dug into was around organic growth. And we saw this large disparity between the firms that were getting premium valuation multiples versus firms that weren't. That was related to this organic growth key performance indicator. And what we discovered was that the firms that had built these repeatable, scalable, predictable processes, these systems, were significantly more valued than firms that hadn't. So, referral dependent firms have a ceiling, so the growth is capped. I think that's certainly one of the big takeaways. A firm with real organic acquisition engines have a growth rate that isn't tied to, how many golf games the founder can play with a prospect. So I think the longer term impact of this is that I think it changes who ultimately ends up getting acquired as well. So a smaller firm with a stronger niche and a repeatable acquisition engine becomes much more attractive than a bigger firm with a stagnant one, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if we begin to see that sort of outcome from an M&A perspective.
And what is your view on how niche practices factor into all of this?
Yeah, so niching works because it's the only way the economics of organic growth actually work. A generic message to like anyone with money converts poorly because because it costs a fortune to test. A specific message to like a physician nearing retirement or business owners planning an exit converts dramatically better. So the content speaks directly to the problem instead of the demographic. We talk about this as resonance. Our platform was built to surface not just demographic variables related to an ideal client profile, but what are the psychographic insights and the behavioral insights that that are relevant to that ideal client profile? Most marketing fails because of a misalignment between the narrative of the firm and the understanding of the intent of the audience. And so part of that intent measure can get surfaced by understanding the nuances related to an ideal client profile's values, their motivations, their key pain points, what's keeping them up at night. And different messaging is going to resonate differently with an ICP. And so you want to test variations based on messaging that addresses pain points versus messaging that addresses values and motivators. And so that's a sort of, kind of nuanced science that should go into digital, media, related to driving organic growth within this sector. And so niching becomes really important because it drives resonance. Resonance is what drives engagement, and engagement is what turns a click into a visit to a funnel page, to a completed quiz form, to a scheduled call, to showing up on that call, and ultimately that qualified lead converting into a new client for a firm and transitioning assets over to the firm.
Ian, you provided a lot of relevant and detailed information. I think a lot of people will benefit from this. Thank you
Thank you.
very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.